ought not to, making sense of negative modal verbs. Hello learners! Welcome to another video in our Grammar Fundamentals series. Today, we're going to take a deep dive into a very particular part of the English language, the negative form of the modal verb, ought to, which is ought not to, or oughtn't to. This might sound a bit complex, but don't worry, we'll break it down piece by piece, so you understand it perfectly. Before diving into the negative form, let's first review what ought to means. Ought to is a modal verb used to express obligation or advisability. When you say someone ought to do something, you're either stating that it's their duty, or it would be a good idea for them to do it. For instance, you ought to study for your test implies that it is necessary or advisable to study. Now that we're comfortable with ought to, let's move to its negative form, ought not to. This is used to express that something is not a good idea or is not advisable. For example, you ought not to skip meals means it's not a good idea to skip meals. In informal or spoken English, ought not to is often shortened to oughtn't to. It's the same as ought not to, just a bit more condensed. It's mostly used in British English, though, and it's a bit less common in American English. Let's take a look at a few more examples to understand better. 1. You oughtn't to ignore your health. 2. They ought not to leave their belongings unattended. 3. She oughtn't to procrastinate her work. Remember, ought not to and oughtn't to essentially mean the same thing and can be used interchangeably, depending on formality and regional usage. And there we go, we've broken down the meaning and usage of the negative form of ought to. Remember, ought not to and oughtn't to express the idea that something is not advisable. Whether you're writing or speaking, you can now use this modal verb confidently in negative sentences. As always, the key to mastering English or any language is practice. Keep practicing, and you'll have these concepts down in no time. Thanks for joining us in today's video. Keep learning and growing, and we'll see you in our next lesson.